John White steps onto Roanoke Island for the first time in 3 years. He left behind 115 colonists, his daughter, his infant granddaughter. The houses are empty. He walks through the settlement calling her name. Nothing. He checks every building. The chests are packed and buried. The tools are organized. Everything suggests they left carefully, deliberately. No bodies, no graves, no blood. On a tree outside the fort, carved in clean letters, CROATOAN. White knows what it means. It's an island 50 miles south. It's where his allies live. He rushes back to the ship. He begs the captain to take him there. The captain refuses. A storm is coming. They sail for England. White never returns to America. 150 people vanished without a trace. But that's not where this story begins. Because 3 years earlier, someone made a decision that doomed every single person on that island. And the man who made it walked away alive. This is the story of what really happened at Roanoke, London. 1584. Sir Walter Raleigh stands before Queen Elizabeth with a charter in his hand. The document gives him the right to claim any land in North America not already possessed by a Christian monarch. Raleigh has never been to North America. He doesn't know what's there. He doesn't know who's there. He doesn't care. Because the charter says nothing about the people. It only mentions Christian monarchs. In Raleigh's mind, the land is empty. He's wrong. Raleigh sends 2 ships to scout the coast. They reach the Outer Banks in July 1584. The captains, Philip Amars and Arthur Barlow, go ashore and find paradise. Thick forests, clear water, abundant game. Then the people appear. A group of men walk out of the forest and stop on the beach. They're Algonquian. They've lived here for thousands of years. They watch the English ships with suspicion. One man approaches. The English offer him a hat and a shirt. He accepts. He gestures for them to follow him. They follow him to a village. The village leader's name is Wingina. He's a werowance, a political coordinator for multiple communities. Wingina allows the English to stay. He feeds them. He shows them the island. The English stay for 6 weeks. They take notes on everything, the crops, the buildings, the political structures. They conclude that the Algonquians are gentle, loving and eager to accept English authority. This is a catastrophic misunderstanding. The Algonquians aren't eager to accept anything. They're being polite to armed strangers. They're gathering intelligence. They're trying to figure out what these people want. Amars and Barlow return to England and report to Raleigh. They describe Roanoke as the most plentiful land in the world. They say the natives are friendly and willing to trade. Raleigh makes his decision. He'll establish a colony on Roanoke Island. He'll call the territory Virginia. He'll become the richest man in England. He begins recruiting immediately. But here's what Raleigh doesn't know. Here's what the scouts didn't see. Here's what will kill everyone he sends. The Algonquians have a sophisticated political network spanning hundreds of miles. They have alliances. They have enemies. They have rules about territory and resources and authority. The English are about to violate every single one of those rules. And Wingina is about to learn exactly what the strangers really want. April 1585. 7 ships leave England carrying 600 men. Their leader is Sir Richard Grenville. Grenville fought in Ireland suppressing rebellions. His method was simple. Burn the crops, destroy the villages, starve the population into submission. He's bringing that experience to America. The fleet reaches Roanoke in June. Grenville anchors offshore and sends men to build a fort. They construct crude shelters. They plant a garden. Grenville leaves Ralph Lane in command with 107 men. Then Grenville sails back to England. He promises to return with supplies in a few months. He doesn't return for a year. Lane is a military administrator. He served in Ireland during the same campaigns as Grenville. He watched entire regions depopulated. He learned that indigenous people are problems to be solved. He's about to apply that lesson at first. Wingina cooperates. He provides corn. He shares information about the region. He introduces Lane to other leaders, but Lane keeps demanding more corn, more land, more submission. Wingina begins to withdraw. The corn supply slows. Wingina stops visiting the fort. Lane interprets this as hostility. In the spring of 1586, Lane receives intelligence that Wingina is organizing an alliance to drive the English off the island. The intelligence might be true, it might be exaggerated, it might be completely invented. Lane doesn't care. He's already decided what to do. He assembles armed men and marches to Wingina's village at dawn. Wingina isn't expecting an attack. He's unarmed. Lane's men surround him and open fire. Wingina runs into the forest. A soldier named Edward Nugent chases him down and kills him. Nugent cuts off Wingina's head and brings it back to the fort. Lane plants the head on a stake outside the palisade. This isn't a battle. This isn't self-defense. This is an execution designed to terrorize the Algonquians into submission. It has the opposite effect. Every Algonquian community within 100 miles abandons contact with the English. The corn supply stops completely. Lane's men begin to starve. In June 1586, Sir Francis Drake arrives with a fleet returning from the Caribbean. Drake offers to resupply the colony or evacuate it. Lane chooses evacuation. 107 men board Drake's ships and leave Roanoke Island empty. They've spent 10 months on the island. They've accomplished nothing. They've murdered our expected leader. They've alienated every potential ally. And Raleigh is about to send families. Here's what should have happened next. Raleigh should have cancelled the colony. He should have recognized that Roanoke was a disaster. He should have understood that the Algonquians would never trust the English again. But Raleigh doesn't care about the Algonquians. He cares about his investment. He cares about his reputation. He cares about the land. So he recruits 117 new colonists. This time families, women, children. The governor is John White. White is an artist. He traveled to Roanoke with Lane in 1585. But he went as an observer. He spent his time drawing detailed illustrations of Algonquian villages and customs. White is not a soldier. He's not violent. He believes peaceful coexistence is possible. He's wrong, but he believes it. White's instructions from Raleigh are explicit. Do not settle on Roanoke Island. Sail north to Chesapeake Bay. Establish the colony there. In territory not poisoned by Lane's atrocities. The plan makes sense, but the plan is never followed. The fleet's navigator is a Portuguese privateer named Simon Fernandez. Fernandez wants to raid Spanish treasure ships in the Caribbean. Every day spent transporting colonists is a day he's not hunting gold. When the fleet reaches the Outer Banks in July 1587, Fernandez refuses to go any farther. He orders the colonists to disembark on Roanoke Island. Immediately, White protests. He reminds Fernandez of Raleigh's orders. Fernandez tells him the colonists can stay on Roanoke or swim. The colonists go ashore. They find Lane's abandoned fort. The palisade is rotting. The houses are overgrown. Animal bones litter the floors. They move into the ruins. White tries to make contact with the CROATOAN people. The CROATOANs are led by a man named Manteo. Manteo traveled to England with the first expedition. He speaks English. He converted to Christianity. He trusts White more than any other Englishman. Manteo agrees to help. But he warns White that the other Algonquian groups still remember Lane. They still remember Wingina's murder. White listens. But he doesn't understand. He thinks because he personally didn't kill Wingina, the Algonquians will treat him differently. But to the Algonquians, White is English. That's all that matters. The English killed Wingina. The English are invaders. The English cannot be trusted. White doesn't grasp this until it's too late. Late July. A colonist named George Howe goes alone to the north end of the island to catch crabs. He wades into the water unarmed. Algonquian warriors emerge from the forest. They surround Howe. They beat him to death with clubs. They shoot him 16 times with arrows. They leave his body in the water. When the colonists find Howe, his skull is crushed. White is horrified. He asks Manteo what this means. Manteo explains it's retaliation. It's a message. The Algonquians are re-demonstrating that the English are not safe here. White decides to respond with force. He assembles armed men and plans a raid on the village of Dasamongaponke, which he believes is sheltering the warriors who killed Howe. Manteo warns him. Dasamongaponke was abandoned. The people there now are CROATOANs, Manteo's people. White's only allies. White ignores the warning. He attacks at night. His men surround the longhouses and open fire. People scream. They flee into the forest. When the sun rises, White realizes what he's done. He attacked the CROATOANs. The only Algonquians still willing to help the English. Manteo forgives him. Or at least, Manteo doesn't retaliate. But the CROATOANs withdraw from Roanoke Island. White and his colonists are now completely alone. By August, the colony is failing. The gardens haven't produced food. The stored supplies are running low. They have no boats for fishing. They have no experience hunting here. They have no allies. White calls a meeting. Someone needs to return to England for emergency supplies. The colonists vote that White should go. White refuses. He's the governor. He can't abandon them. The colonists insist. White is the only man Raleigh will listen to. White's daughter, Eleanor Dare, is among the colonists. So is her husband. Ananias on August 18, 1587. Eleanor gives birth to a daughter. They name her Virginia Dare. She's the first English child born in North America. White holds High's granddaughter and agrees to sail to England. He promises to return within a few months. He tells the colonists that if they're forced to leave the island, they should carve the name of their destination on a tree. If they leave under attack, they should carve a cross above the name. On August 27, 1587, White boards a ship and sails east. He leaves behind 115 people. He will never see any of them again. But the reason why is worse than anyone imagined. White reaches England in November 1587. He goes immediately to Raleigh. He explains the desperate situation. Raleigh agrees to send help. Then England goes to war with Spain. In 1588, King Philip II launches the Spanish Armada. 130 warships sail toward England. Every English ship is commandeered for military service. Raleigh's relief mission is cancelled. White is trapped in England for 2 years. Think about what's happening on Roanoke Island during those 2 years. The colonists are waiting. They're watching the horizon for ships that don't come. They're rationing food that's running out. They're trying to survive in a place where everyone around them wants them gone, and White is in England, powerless. The Armada is defeated in August 1588, but the war continues. The naval blockade remains in place. White can't get passage on any ship. He writes desperate letters to Raleigh, to the Privy Council, to anyone who will listen. No one helps him. In 1590, White finally secures passage on a privateering expedition commanded by John Watts. The fleet isn't going to Roanoke. It's going to raid Spanish settlements in the Caribbean, but Watts agrees to make a brief detour. White boards. In March 1590, the fleet sails to the Caribbean and spends 4 months attacking Spanish ships. White endures the delay in agony. In August 1590, the fleet finally turns north toward the Outer Banks. They reach Roanoke Island on August 18, 1590. It's Virginia Dare's 3rd birthday. White can see smoke rising from the island. He convinces himself the colonists have seen the ships and are lighting signal fires. He's wrong. The smoke is from a lightning strike. The forest is burning. White and a landing party row toward shore. The water is rough. The boat capsizes in the surf. 7 men drown. White survives. He drags himself onto the beach and runs toward the settlement. He reaches the palisade. The gate is open. The houses are empty. White walks through the settlement, calling his daughter's name. No one answers. He checks every building. He finds chests of belongings carefully packed and buried. He finds books and maps. He finds tools and armor. He finds no people. On a post near the entrance, some carved CRO. On a tree outside the palisade, CROATOAN. The carvings are neat, deliberate. There's no cross. White understands. They went to CROATOAN Island. They left peacefully. He returns to the ships and begs the captain to sail to CROATOAN. The captain refuses. A storm is approaching. The fleet is low on water. They're sailing for England immediately. White pleads. He offers money. The captain won't be moved. The fleet leaves Roanoke Island and sails east. White stands on the deck and watches the coastline disappear. He never returns to America. He dies in 1593. The colonists are never found. But here's what White didn't know. Here's what changes everything. The word CROATOAN might not have been an answer. It might have been a lie. Think about the timeline. White leaves in August 1587. He returns in August 1590. 3 years. At some point during those 3 years, the colonists carved CROATOAN on a tree and left the island. But when did they leave? In 1587, a few months after White sailed. Did they leave in 1588, 1589? Did they survive until just before White returned? We don't know, and that uncertainty matters because it changes what CROATOAN means if the colonists left voluntarily in 1587 or 1588. CROATOAN probably indicates where they went. They walked to the southern end of Roanoke Island, built boats, and sailed to CROATOAN Island to join Manteo's people. This is the optimistic interpretation. This is the version where the colonists survived by integrating into an Algonquian community. But there's another possibility. What if the colonists didn't carve CROATOAN? What if someone else did? What if the Algonquians attacked the settlement, killed most of the colonists, and took a few survivors to CROATOAN Island as captives or adoptees? What if the carving was left as information for other Algonquians, not as a message for white? Or what if the colonists were forced to leave under threat? What if they carved CROATOAN under duress, knowing they'd never actually reach the island? The absence of a cross doesn't prove they left peacefully. It only proves that whoever carved the word didn't carve a cross. White assumed the colonists carved it, but he didn't know that for certain, and there's one more disturbing possibility. What if the colonists did go to CROATOAN, but not as equals? What if they weren't as subordinates? What if Manteo's people accepted them only as servants or laborers? What if integration meant subjugation? We romanticize the idea of the colonists joining an Algonquian community. We imagine mutual respect and cultural exchange. But why would the CROATOANs welcome the English as equals? The English had just spent 3 years proving they were violent, incompetent, and untrustworthy. The English had attacked the CROATOANs by mistake. The CROATOANs had every reason to exploit the colonists' desperation. This is the version of the story no one wants to tell, because it complicates the narrative. Because it doesn't offer redemption or closure, but it might be the truth. Let's examine the evidence. In the early 1600s, English explorers reported encountering Algonquians with European features. Gray eyes, light hair. John Smith, founder of Jamestown, wrote about these reports in 1608. William Strachey, secretary of Jamestown, recorded similar stories in 1612. Both men claimed that descendants of the Roanoke colonists were living among Algonquian communities in the Outer Banks. This sounds like confirmation. But there's a problem. Neither Smith nor Strachey actually met these people. They were repeating rumors, third-hand accounts, stories filtered through translators and shaped by English assumption. The English wanted to believe the colonists had survived, so they interpreted any mention of light-skinned Algonquians as evidence of Roanoke survivors. But light skin wasn't unique to Europeans. Some Algonquian people had naturally lighter complexions. Some had grey eyes. The English saw what they wanted to see. There's no verified account of anyone meeting a Roanoke survivor or descendant. Then there's the archaeological evidence. In the 1990s, archaeologists excavated sites on Hatteras Island, formerly CROATOAN Island. They found European artifacts mixed with Algonquian materials, gun parts, copper, a signet ring with a lion design that might have belonged to a colonist. This suggests contact between the colonists and the CROATOANs, but it doesn't prove the colonists lived there long term. The artifacts could have been traded. They could have been scavenged from the abandoned Roanoke settlement. They could have been taken from dead colonists. More recent excavations have found similar artifacts at sites 50 miles inland from Roanoke. This suggests some colonists might have traveled west into the interior, not south to CROATOAN. But again, artifacts don't prove survival. They only prove presence. The DNA evidence is equally inconclusive. Researchers have tested descendants of Algonquian communities in the region. Some samples show European ancestry, but that ancestry could have come from any European contact over 4 centuries. It doesn't specifically link to the Roanoke colonists. Every piece of evidence is ambiguous. Every theory is plausible but unproven. The colonists went somewhere. They left traces, but those traces don't tell us what happened to them. And that's not an accident, because the people who knew what happened never wrote it down. The Algonquians had their own version of events. They knew where the colonists went. They knew what happened to them. They knew whether they survived or died or something in between. But the Algonquians transmitted knowledge orally. They didn't write histories. And when English colonizers returned to the region in the 1600s, they didn't ask the Algonquians what happened. They interrogated them. They demanded answers. They threatened violence if the answers weren't satisfactory. The Algonquians told the English what the English wanted to hear, or they told them nothing. By the mid-1600s, most of the Algonquian communities in the Outer Banks had been destroyed. Disease, warfare, displacement, the survivors were absorbed into larger confederacies or pushed inland. Their languages began to disappear, their oral histories fragmented. Whatever the Algonquians knew about Roanoke died with them. This is the real tragedy. Not that the colonists disappeared, but that the knowledge of their fate was erased by colonization, erased by the same process that brought the colonists to Roanoke in the first place. The English created the mystery by destroying the people who could have solved it, and now we're left with speculation. But there is one more account, one more piece of testimony that the English recorded but never fully believed. In 1607, the Jamestown colonists heard a story from the Powhatan Confederacy. The Powhatan chief, Wingina, told the English about a group of Europeans who had been living among the Chesapeake people. The Chesapeake were an Algonquian group that controlled the southern shore of Chesapeake Bay. Raleigh's original plan had been to establish the Roanoke colony in Chesapeake territory. Wingina claimed he had ordered the Chesapeake to kill these Europeans shortly before Jamestown was founded. He said the Europeans had included men, women and children. The English dismissed this story. They assumed Wingina was lying or confused. They assumed he was talking about different Europeans, not the Roanoke colonists. But the timeline fits. The description fits. What if the Roanoke colonists did try to reach the Chesapeake? What if they succeeded? What if they lived there for years before being killed? What if Wingina was telling the truth? And what if he killed them specifically because the Jamestown colonists had just arrived? What if he was eliminating a potential English foothold before it could become a threat? This version of the story is the darkest, because it means the colonists survived for nearly 20 years. They adapted, they integrated, they built new lives, and then they were massacred specifically because other Englishmen arrived, killed, not by their own incompetence, but by the empire that sent them. We'll never know if this is true, but it's consistent with everything we do know, and it raises a question that should have been asked 400 years ago. What gave England the right to send people to Roanoke in the first place? Raleigh's charter from Queen Elizabeth granted him the right to claim any land in North America not possessed by a Christian monarch. The language is revealing. Not any empty land, not any unclaimed land, any land not possessed by a Christian monarch. The charter acknowledged that people lived in North America. It just didn't count them as legitimate sovereigns because they weren't Christian, because they weren't monarchs, because they were, in the English worldview, savages who didn't truly own the land they lived on. This was the legal and theological justification for colonizati, on the doctrine of discovery, the idea that Christian Europeans had the right to claim non-Christian lands simply by arriving there, declaring possession. It didn't matter that the Algonquians had lived on Roanoke Island for generations. It didn't matter that they had political systems and property rights and territorial boundaries. They weren't Christian, so their sovereignty didn't count. This doctrine was adopted by every European colonial power: Spain, Portugal, France, England, the Netherlands. It became the foundation of international law. It was cited in court cases into the 20th century. It was used to justify the displacement of indigenous peoples on every continent. And it all started with documents like Raleigh's Charter, documents that erased indigenous people with a single sentence. The Roanoke colonists were operating under this framework. They genuinely believed they had the right to settle on Roanoke Island. They believed English law superseded Algonquian law. They were wrong. But the entire apparatus of English colonization reinforced this belief. When Ralph Lane murdered Wingina, he wasn't violating English law. He was enforcing it. He was asserting English sovereignty over people who refused to submit. When John White attacked the CROATOANs, he wasn't making a mistake. He was following the logic of colonization. Indigenous resistance was illegitimate. Indigenous people were obstacles. The colonists didn't see themselves as invaders. They saw them as settlers, pioneers, the advance guard of civilization. But from the Algonquian perspective, they were invaders. Plain and simple. And the Algonquians responded the way any people would respond to invasion. They resisted. They fought back. They used every tool available to drive the invaders out. It worked. The Roanoke colonies failed. The colonists disappeared. For a brief moment, the Algonquians won, but England didn't stop. England never stopped. 20 years after Roanoke, England tried again at Jamestown. The Jamestown colonists repeated almost every mistake the Roanoke colonists made. They arrived without adequate food. They built their settlement in a swamp. They alienated the local Algonquian population immediately during the winter of 1609, the starving time. The Jamestown colonists resorted to cannibalism. They dug up corpses and ate them. They killed each other for food. Of 500 colonists, only 60 survived until spring. But Jamestown didn't disappear because the Virginia Company kept sending ships. It kept sending supplies. It kept sending reinforcements. And it kept sending orders to use violence. In 1610, the English began systematically destroying Algonquian villages. They burnt crops. They poisoned wells. They killed non-combatants. In 1622, the Powhatan Confederacy launched a coordinated attack on English settlements. They killed 347 colonists in a single day. The English retaliated by escalating their campaign of extermination. By 1646, the Powhatan Confederacy was defeated. The survivors were confined to tiny reservations. Their lands were seized. Their population had been reduced by 90%. This became the template for English colonization in North America, not cooperation. Conquest. The Roanoke colonies failed because they were too small and too isolated to impose their will through force. But later colonies succeeded because they brought overwhelming violence. The lesson England learned from Roanoke wasn't that colonization was wrong. It was that colonization required more guns, and so the killing continued for centuries. The Algonquian communities of the Outer Banks were destroyed by the mid-1600s. The survivors scattered. Their descendants were absorbed into other groups, or pushed so far from their homeland that their connection to the land was severed. By the 1700s, Roanoke Island was settled by English and later American colonists who knew nothing of the people who had lived there before. The Algonquians were erased, not just killed, but erased from history. Their names were forgotten. Their stories were lost. Their perspective on Roanoke was never recorded. What remains is the English version. The story of the lost colony. The mystery of the vanished settlers. We remember the colonists because they were English, because they were documented, because their disappearance disrupted the colonial project. We don't remember the Algonquins because they weren't supposed to matter, but they did matter. They were the reason the colony failed. They were the agents of their own survival. For a few years, they stopped the English invasion, and that deserves to be remembered. So what happened to the 115 colonists? Here's the most likely scenario based on all available evidence. When white failed to return, the colonists realized they were abandoned. They knew they couldn't survive another winter on Roanoke Island. They had no food, no allies, no hope of rescue. They made a decision. They would leave the island and seek shelter with the only Algonquian group that hadn't completely severed ties, the CROATOANs. They packed their belongings. They dismantled parts of the fort. They carved CROATOAN on a tree as a message for any English ship that might arrive. Then they left. Some probably went to CROATOAN Island. They joined Manteo's community. They married into Algonquian families. Within a generation, their English identity dissolved. Their children spoke Algonquian. Their grandchildren forgot England entirely. Some probably tried to reach the Chesapeake. They traveled north along the coast or inland through the forests. Some might have made it. Some might have lived among the Chesapeake people for years before being killed when Jamestown arrived. Some probably died during the journey. Disease, starvation, exposure. The Outer Banks are unforgiving for people who don't know how to survive there. Some might have been killed by Algonquian groups, still angry about Lane's atrocities. Revenge for Wingina. Justice for the attack on the CROATOAN. Some might have died alone, separated from the group, lost in a landscape they never learned to navigate. The colonists didn't vanish. They scattered. They dispersed into a world that had no obligation to remember them. And gradually, over years and decades, they stopped being English. They became something else. Or they became nothing. This is not a mystery. This is what happens when people invade someone else's land without the power to hold it. They're absorbed, they're expelled, they're destroyed. The Roanoke colonists were never going to build a permanent English settlement. They didn't have the numbers. They didn't have the resources. They didn't have the knowledge. All they had was arrogance, and arrogance doesn't protect you from starvation. August 18th, 1590. John White stands on the beach of Roanoke Island and stares at the word carved into the tree, CROATOAN. He knows what it means. But he also knows he'll never get there. He knows the captain won't take him. He knows this is the last time he'll ever set foot on this island. He's failed everyone who trusted him. His daughter is gone. His granddaughter is gone. 115 people who believed his promises are gone, and he's about to sail away and leave them behind. White boards the ship. He watches the coastline disappear. He spends the rest of his life trying to organize another expedition. He never finds the funding. He never finds the support. He dies in 1593. 3 years after returning from Roanoke, he dies not knowing, and maybe that's fitting, because the colonists didn't disappear mysteriously. They disappeared predictably. They disappeared because England sent them to steal land they couldn't hold, because Raleigh cared more about profit than people, because Fernandez refused to follow orders, because Lane murdered Wingina, because White attacked the CROATOANs. They disappeared because colonization is violence, and violence has consequences. The Roanoke colonists vanished. But the violence that sent them didn't. It continued. It intensified. It became the foundation of nations. The word on the tree says CROATOAN, but it should say something else. It should say this land was already claimed. This land was already loved. This land was defended by people who refused to surrender. And for a brief moment, those people won. 115 colonists vanished without a trace. The Algonquians made sure of it. This has been Curious Historians. If you want to support the channel and help us uncover more dark stories from history, please subscribe and share this video. The past is not a mystery. It's a record of choices and consequences. Thank you for watching.